They told you she vanished. But disappearances like this don't happen without a price being paid in blood shadow or memory. Evangelene Vandermark didn't just walk into a snowstorm in Pittsburgh in 1887. She stepped out of time, out of the story she was supposed to play, and into something older than the city itself. It started with whispers. A woman born into wealth, married to steel baron Dorian Vandermark, living in a house built like a cathedral with walls so thick you couldn't hear someone scream. But Evangelene began asking questions about her family's lineage, about the tunnels beneath the estate, about the book her husband kept locked behind iron glass that wasn't supposed to exist. She wasn't supposed to open it, but she did, and the moment she read it, she changed. Witnesses claimed they saw her walking barefoot in a blizzard on Carson Street, mouth moving like she was praying. But the words didn't sound like anything holy. One man swore she looked right through him, like her eyes weren't her own anymore. Another said her face wasn't the same as the day before, as if something was peeling her identity away, layer by layer. The police called it a disappearance. The papers blamed hysteria. But that was the script. That's always the script. When a woman touches forbidden knowledge and refuses to break, the last confirmed sighting of Evangelene was at 3 a.m. outside St. Gertrude's Asylum, which had been abandoned for years. They found her gloves on the gate, folded perfectly, clean despite the snow. She never came home. But what she left behind was worse than a corpse. She left a question, a rupture, a silence that still echoes under Pittsburgh to this day. And if you trace it far enough, through the tunnels beneath the steel mills, through the archives that were suddenly sealed, through the families that changed their names, you don't find a missing woman. You find a door someone tried to bury in ice. But the ice is melting now, and you're standing in front of it. They built the asylum on ground that was never meant to be settled, old burial soil marked by tribes who refused to speak its name. St. Gertrude's, they called it. But no saint ever walked those halls, only echoes. And Evangeline's gloves were laid at its gates like an offering. The police never opened an investigation. No dogs were called, no search parties deployed, just quiet dismissal and a swift obituary printed before the week was done. It didn't list a cause, just a phrase, survived by legacy. But that legacy was something else entirely, because while the city forgot her name, something deeper remembered. In the months following her vanishing, dozens of men working in the steel mills near the Monongahela began reporting night terrors. They described seeing a woman with no eyes, standing in the rafters mouthing words in reverse, always pointing east, toward a chapel that had been burned down in 1843 and never rebuilt. Dorian Vandermark withdrew from public life, canceled all investments, sold his estate within weeks. When asked by a journalist about his wife, he simply said, "She found the architect." Then he left the country and was never seen again. But this is not about madness, not about ghosts. This is about architecture, psychological and sacred. Because what Evangelene uncovered was not just a forgotten language. It was a blueprint, a lattice of symbols used to reshape perception in those who read it. She found writings older than Latin, written by monks who believed the mind was a cathedral, and every belief, every fear, every desire was a stained glass window designed by unseen hands. That book, bound in animal skin, kept behind iron glass, was not written by one author. It was compiled over centuries, passed through forbidden monasteries and occult universities. Its last known translator vanished in 1621 during a lightning storm that burned the monastery to ash. Evangelene was the first to decode a full passage, and once she did, she stopped speaking in known languages. She began writing in symbols that mirrored human neural pathways, not randomly, with precision. as if she'd been taught by something not human. What vanished was not just Evangelene. It was the barrier between symbol and self. And when that barrier breaks, so does everything you believe is you. After Evangelene's vanishing, Pittsburgh began to crack, not on the surface, but underneath. Old workers in the foundries swore they heard a sound in the steam pipes, not pressure, not metal, a voice, low female, repeating the same phrase every night at the same hour, not in English, not in anything they could recognize, but it made them weep without knowing why. City records from early 1888 reveal something that was later redacted, a pattern of disappearances, not of people, but of documents, whole blueprints of churches, asylum floor plans, railway maps, vanishing from archives overnight, as if the city itself was being rewritten, as if someone was editing the memory of the land. And then came the disappearances of those who remembered Evangelene, the chambermaid who claimed she saw her mistress walk through a wall of the manor during a thunderstorm, was found drowned in a dry fountain. A priest who had given her private confessional was found with every page of his Bible torn out and his mouth stitched closed. Each time someone spoke her name in public, they were erased. This is not the work of one man or one order. This is system architecture, the kind built not in stone, but in belief, in myth, in silence enforced by fear and sealed by ritual, because what Evangelene unlocked, what that book truly contained, was the origin of influence, the first spell, the root algorithm of organized thought, and it terrified them. Imagine a language that doesn't just describe thought, but programs it, that alters memory as you read it, that implants compulsions while making you believe they're your own. This is not fiction. This is design. The very symbols we use every day, letters, logos, flags, are echoes of this root system. Evangelene's disappearance was not a warning. It was a demonstration that even in a world ruled by steel tycoons and industrial empires, the true masters are those who control what is remembered. And Emma, the chapel she kept drawing in her journals, did not exist on any Pittsburgh map. No one remembered it. No records remained. Yet over a dozen hand-drawn floor plans by Evangelene showed the same structure, identical dimensions, same six-sided nave, same underground crypt marked by a spiral symbol with no known origin. But here's the fracture. A man named Elias Coldwell, a forgotten city architect, left behind an unfinished memoir in a locked drawer at the Carnegie Institute. That memoir was found by accident during renovations in 1931. It described working on a chapel commission in 1879 for a private family estate just outside the city. The client, Dorian Vandermark. The chapel was never registered with the city. No inspections, no permits, no public mention, just sketches, blueprints, and one chilling sentence written in shaky ink. The chapel is not for worship, it is for containment. Elias vanished before the chapel was completed, and every laborer assigned to the site either died in freak accidents or fled before its foundation was laid. Those who stayed described impossible geometry, walls that curved inward and outward at once, stairs that led nowhere, and a pressure in the air like a breath being held by the land itself. Evangelene found those blueprints years later in her husband's private library, and when she did, she began dreaming in shapes. She spoke of visions, not of the future, but of places that never were, ruins built in reverse, clock towers with no hands, and rooms full of weeping statues that bled from the eyes. When she tried to speak of them, her voice would fail. When she tried to draw them, the ink would smear in patterns she didn't remember making. This was not trauma. This was tuning. The chapel was not a building. It was a machine, a circuit. Its floor plan mirrored neural maps of the limbic system, its architecture designed not to house faith, but to rewrite emotion through resonance. They tried to say she was unwell, that grief had driven her into madness, that she had become unstable, paranoid, hysterical. But the doctors brought to evaluate her were not from any known hospital. Their credentials traced back to foundations that no longer exist, and their methods were not medical. They were ritual. 3 men in gray coats, no names, no notes, no follow-up. They spent exactly 13 minutes alone with her, and when they left, she did not speak for 3 days. But on the 4th, she began writing again, not with a pen, but with her fingernail, into the walls of her dressing chamber, circles within circles, words without vowels, maps without landmarks. But all of it pulsed with meaning too deep for language. A maid who witnessed the room described the sensation as standing inside someone else's dream. Time moved slower, voices echoed, the wallpaper peeled by itself. This was not a breakdown. It was initiation. She had reached a threshold, one that few ever approach, where the self begins to dissolve, and in its place, a different voice emerges. Her final journal entry scrawled in charcoal on the back of a torn ledger read, "They do not imprison you with bars. They imprison you with names." What she meant was this, that the words we use to define ourselves are not ours. They are inherited, programmed, repeated so often we forget they were ever placed there. Evangelene had found a way to erase them, to reach back behind the first story, to the primal script beneath memory. And that above all is what made her dangerous, because if you erase the names, the titles, the histories, you erase the boundaries of control. And in that moment, you are not property, not citizen, not wife, you are free. But freedom is the one force the architects cannot allow, because it unbinds the entire lattice. So they sent the three men, not to help her, but to seal her, to reinsert the programming, to bind her back into the... By the winter of 1887, the city's snowfall broke all known records. But the cold wasn't natural. It had weight, a static hum that vibrated through bone. Birds stopped flying over the Vandermark estate. Dogs refused to enter the East Wing, and every clock in the manor stopped at 3:09 a.m., the same moment Evangelene was last seen. Neighbors reported hearing low tones at night, not music, not voice, something deeper, like the groan of stone under pressure, and always, always it came from beneath. See, this is what they never told you, that beneath the Vandermark estate was not just cellar and stone, but a sealed foundation from an older structure, predating Pittsburgh itself, a building that does not appear on any map, not colonial, not native, because it was never meant to be found. And yet, Evangelene found it. There's a passage in one of her final letters, never mailed, recovered from inside a music box hidden under the floorboard, she wrote. "There is a staircase with no bottom, and every step downward removes something from me, a memory, a name, a fear, until what walks is no longer mine." This was not metaphor. It was transcription. Others who came in contact with her notes reported vertigo, blackouts, sudden emotional inversions. One man became unable to recognize his wife's face. Another forgot his own name when he looked in the mirror. This is when the city stepped in, not through police, not through law, but through shadow. Men in long coats began visiting anyone connected to the case. Journalists, servants, archivists. Each one either vanished, recanted, or went silent. What they were covering was not a disappearance. It was a rupture, because Evangelene had crossed the membrane, the thin psychological wall that holds this reality intact. And from the other side, she was broadcasting something, not words, not visions, but frequencies, encoded information through emotion, symbols, and sound, the old way of speaking. The night Evangelene vanished was no accident. It was an orchestrated ritual in shadow and steel. Her husband, Cornelius Vandermark, was no mere industrialist. He was a key architect of the Pittsburgh Circle, a cabal so secret it erased its own tracks. When Evangelene confronted him, she brought with her not just evidence, but a challenge to centuries of silent complicity. Cornelius did not raise his voice. His rage was a slow frost. He told her marriage had been a contract, a weapon, a chain forged to bind in silence. She was a liability, an infection to be excised, and in the hour before midnight, he summoned his inner circle, men who dealt in blood debts and whispered threats. Evangelene had hidden her evidence in a secret chamber, a room built into the bones of the mansion, behind oak paneling, behind lies, behind centuries of violence. But Cornelius knew every secret door, every shadowed stairwell, because he had built them, had designed them, to trap the unwary, to imprison the truth. As footsteps echoed in the hall, she made a desperate decision to lock herself in the chamber, to become both guardian and prisoner. The chamber became her tomb, the walls sealed by cold mortar. Her final journal entry tells of clawed walls, desperation, a last message scratched into wood. Edmund, the circle continues. Stop them. Justice for father. The emerald gown left in the foyer was no ghostly apparition, but a signal, a staged vanishing act meant to mislead and buy time. Her death was brutal, a blow to the head, defensive wounds on her arms, a violent end to a quiet rebellion. Yet her story did not end in that sealed room. Decades later, during renovations of the Vandermark mansion, workers stumbled upon the hidden chamber. Inside, hundreds of documents, photographs, correspondence, all laying bare a conspiracy that spanned decades. The Pittsburgh Circle had profited from death and destruction, sabotage, murder, and the discovery of Evangelene's hidden chamber in 1921 was a turning point that shattered the silence surrounding the Pittsburgh Circle. What had been whispered rumors and scattered suspicions now had concrete proof. The archive she left behind exposed an industrial underworld built on blood money and deceit. Federal investigators led by Attorney General Harry Doji stepped in. Local law enforcement had long been compromised by bribes and intimidation. But this new force had the mandate to pursue justice across state lines, to unravel a network that controlled more than just Pittsburgh's steel mills. Edmund Hartwell, now living under the alias Edward Harrison in Los Angeles, cooperated with the investigation. He confirmed the chilling details his sister had uncovered before her death. Their shared sacrifice was beginning to bear fruit decades too late. The investigation revealed that the Pittsburgh Circle had been responsible for at least 93 deaths, business rivals sabotaged by explosions, labor organizers silenced by staged accidents, journalists and honest officials eliminated with terrifying efficiency. The methods were brutal and insidious: burned-out factories staged as accidents, mysterious illnesses that mimicked natural causes, disappearances that left no trace. The Circle's influence extended far beyond Pennsylvania. Similar groups operated in industrial cities across America. Their coordination suggested a nationwide conspiracy, a dark web strangling justice and progress for decades. But the fallout was not limited to the criminals. The scandal exposed corruption that reached the highest offices of government. Senators, judges, and congressmen were implicated, some active participants, others silent recipients of bribes. The revelations sparked the largest corruption investigation in American history up to that point. Dozens of public officials resigned or were removed in dis. Evangelene Vandermark's story is not just one of tragedy, but of extraordinary courage. She challenged a world built on greed and violence, despite knowing the risks. Her access to her husband's business affairs gave her a dangerous window into the darkness, a window she used to gather proof instead of wealth or status. The final confrontation between Evangelene and Cornelius was a brutal revelation of power, twisted by ambition. Marriage was no longer a partnership of trust, but a weapon of control and deception. Cornelius had used Evangelene to secure his place in Boston's elite circles while destroying rivals. When she became a threat, she was no longer his wife, but a liability. Her plan to fake her death was desperate but brilliant. Hidden passages in the mansion connected secret tunnels, once used by servants and conspirators alike. These should have been her escape route. But Cornelius knew every inch of the labyrinth. Her greatest mistake was underestimating the ruthlessness of those who sought to silence her. Evangelene sealed herself inside a hidden chamber behind the library to protect her archive. She hoped to survive the night and ensure her evidence would be found someday. Instead, the chamber became her tomb. Human remains discovered beneath a pile of curtains confirmed her fate. Scratches on the walls and broken pottery revealed a horrifying truth. She had been walled up alive, trapped in darkness, with only her courage and determination. Her final act was to scratch a message into the wooden floor, pleading for justice and warning her brother Edmund. The impact of Evangelene's sacrifice reverberated far beyond her death. Her archive led to federal investigations that exposed a decades-long conspiracy. Corrupt officials were unmasked, powerful families brought to justice. Industrial reforms followed. Workers gained protections that saved lives. Journalists and law enforcement developed new tools to confront corporate crime. Evangelene's story also shines a light on the particular dangers women faced in male-dominated societies. Her access to her husband's secrets placed her in constant peril, yet she chose to risk everything for justice, not comfort or safety. Her legacy is a testament to the power of individual courage, a reminder that truth can survive even the darkest violence, that sometimes justice requires sacrifice beyond imagination. In a world still haunted by shadows of unchecked power, her story remains a beacon for those who dare to speak out, a call to never forget the cost of silence or the price of corruption. The discovery of Evangelene Vandermark's hidden chamber in 1921 shook Pittsburgh to its core. Decades of silence were broken by the revelation of crimes long buried in darkness. The sealed room was a time capsule of truth and horror, filled with documents, photographs, and personal journals. Each item a piece of a larger puzzle, exposing the Pittsburgh Circle's ruthless grip on industry and power. Workers who stumbled upon the chamber could never have imagined the story they uncovered. The air inside was stale, but the evidence preserved with eerie clarity. Financial records proved systematic. Insider trading, profiting from planned disasters. Photographs captured secret meetings between industrialists, politicians, and law enforcement officials conspiring in shadows. The archive told a story of murder disguised as accidents of sabotage and calculated elimination of enemies. Victims ranged from labor organizers to honest journalists, and even family members with dangerous knowledge. The depth of corruption was staggering, a network reaching beyond Pennsylvania into the very heart of American industry. Federal agents led by Attorney General Harry Doege took up the investigation. Local authorities were compromised, their hands tied by bribes, threats, and intimidation. The scale of the conspiracy required federal power and unrelenting determination. The names of perpetrators included some of the most prominent families in the nation. Their influence stretched from steel mills to railroad companies, banks, and government offices. Exposure meant scandal, loss of power, and public disgrace for those who had once seemed untouchable. The story of Evangelene and Edmund Hartwell inspired reformers and journalists alike. Their courage became a rallying cry for transparency and justice in a time when silence meant survival. The steel industry was forced to reckon with its past and implement new safety regulations to protect workers' lives. The mystery that began in darkness ended with a light shining on decades of abuse and greed. Evangelene's sacrifice was never forgotten. Her story, a chilling reminder of what happens when power goes unchecked. Yet it also proved the unyielding spirit of those who refuse to be silenced, no matter the cost. The months and years after the discovery were marked by relentless federal investigations. The Pittsburgh Circle's web of deceit slowly unraveled as agents pursued every lead and testimony. Families once shielded by wealth and influence found themselves exposed to public scrutiny. Political careers ended, and corporate empires crumbled under the weight of undeniable evidence. Edmund Hartwell, living now as Edward Harrison, became a key witness in the unfolding drama. Haunted by memories of his sister's death and his own exile, he spoke with heavy heart about the sacrifices made. He revealed how their fight had been lonely and dangerous, with allies disappearing mysteriously, one by one. His testimony provided the final confirmation needed to convict many conspirators and dismantle their network. The investigation also brought to light the tragic fate of Detective Samuel Crawford. Murdered and silenced for getting too close to the truth, Crawford's hidden notes revealed crucial clues. His widow's courage in preserving his work defied the threats that sought to bury justice forever. The uncovering of Crawford's death opened a new front in the battle against corruption within law enforcement itself. Yet even as victories were claimed, the scars of decades of violence remained deep. The workers who had perished in staged accidents were remembered through memorials and new laws. Labor unions gained protections that had long been denied, ensuring safer conditions and stronger voices. But the wounds of betrayal and loss could never be fully healed by legislation alone. The legacy of the Pittsburgh Circle served as a stark warning of what unchecked power could do. It showed how greed and ambition could corrupt marriages, friendships, and entire communities, but it also proved the power of truth when wielded by those brave enough to face overwhelming darkness. The shadow of Evangelene's sacrifice stretched far beyond Pittsburgh's grim alleys and steel mills. Her story became a symbol, whispered among reformers, journalists, and workers fighting for justice. Her courage inspired a new wave of investigative reporting that refused to bow before corporate might. Newspapers adopted safer methods to protect whistleblowers and expose corruption hidden in boardrooms. But the power wielded by the Pittsburgh Circle was not easily broken. Many of their descendants continued to shape American industry from behind layers of secrecy and influence. Philanthropy and public works became masks for the sins buried beneath decades of ruthless ambition. The mansion that once hid secrets was gone, but its echoes haunted the corridors of power to this day. Labor unions seized the moment, pushing for reforms that transformed dangerous workplaces. Federal safety regulations became law, and union leaders gained legal protections that had been long denied. The scars of industrial violence demanded vigilance and a commitment never to forget the fallen. The struggle between workers and corporations entered a new chapter fueled by hard-earned hope and bitter memory. But even as progress marched forward, the story of Evangelene Vandermark revealed harsh truths. That justice often demands sacrifice, and the fight against corruption is never truly over. Her final message, etched in desperation and blood, reminded the world that silence is complicity, and that in the battle between truth and power, every voice raised can become a weapon against darkness. The story did not end with laws or memorials. The ghosts of those lost lingered in the shadows of Pittsburgh's steel skyline. Families torn apart and lives destroyed by greed were a warning written in blood and rust. The Pittsburgh Circle had built its empire on deception, but its foundation was cracked by one brave woman. Evangelene's hidden chamber remained a chilling reminder of the price of truth. Her sacrifice exposed how even the closest bonds could be twisted into tools of control. The marriage meant to be a fortress became a trap where love was weaponized and loyalty bought and sold. Her story revealed the dark heart of industrial ambition and the human cost hidden beneath. As decades passed, the legacy of corruption persisted, but so did the flame of resistance. New generations of workers, organizers, and whistleblowers drew strength from her courage. Her name whispered in union halls and newspaper offices as a symbol of unyielding defiance. The struggle for justice became a continuous fight against powerful forces, determined to silence dissent. In every boardroom shadow and factory floor, Evangelene's story echoed like a warning. That power unchecked breeds cruelty, and that the fight for truth demands relentless vigilance. The question remains: in today's world of digital secrets and global empires, could such shadows still exist? Could the sins of the Pittsburgh Circle be reborn in new forms, wielding modern tools of control and fear? Decades after Evangelene's tragic death, The shadows of the Pittsburgh Circle stretched far beyond the steel mills and factories of 19th-century America. Their reach had evolved with the times, adapting to new technologies and shifting economies. Where once the violence was physical and brutal, now it was cloaked in secrecy and digital manipulation. Corporate empires expanded beyond borders, exploiting global markets while silencing inconvenient truths. Whispers of hidden agendas and covert operations became harder to prove, but no less real. Modern whistleblowers faced threats not only to their lives, but to their careers and families. Surveillance and cyber warfare replaced revolvers and secret passages, but the stakes remained the same. Those who dared to expose corruption risked disappearance or ruin by unseen forces with limitless resources. The legacy of Evangelene Vandermark lives on in every act of courage that challenges systemic abuse. Her story reminds us that darkness thrives where power goes unchecked, and that justice requires sacrifice. From smoky steel towns to the data centers of today, the game between truth and power continues. We must ask ourselves, how far are we willing to go to uncover what others want buried forever? The haunting truth is that the Pittsburgh Circle was not just a chapter in history, but a warning etched into the soul of industry itself. And the fight to break their cycle of violence and deception is far from over. In today's world, the echoes of the Pittsburgh Circle reverberate through shadowy boardrooms and encrypted messages. Powerful corporations still manipulate markets, control information, and silence dissent. But now the battlefield is digital, with hackers, whistleblowers, and investigative journalists facing unprecedented dangers. Sophisticated surveillance technologies track every move, while misinformation clouds the truth. Modern conspiracies don't need bullets when a character can be destroyed with a few keystrokes or a well-placed rumor. The game is played behind firewalls and legal loopholes with billions at stake. Yet the spirit of resistance burns bright in those who risk everything to reveal the hidden machinations of the elite. They expose environmental destruction, exploitative labor practices, and corruption that harms millions worldwide. But just as Evangelene's fate showed us the cost of uncovering the truth, so too do today's truth seekers face ruthless retaliation. Disappeared whistleblowers, anonymous threats, and mysterious accidents remain hauntingly familiar. The Pittsburgh Circle was only the beginning of a legacy of violence and control that continues to shape our world. In the murky intersections of power, technology, and greed, we must stay vigilant and demand accountability, because the price of silence is always paid by the innocent, and the courage to speak out remains the most dangerous weapon against the shadows. The night air was thick with tension as Edmund and Flanagan fled through the narrow alleys of Chicago. Their pursuers were relentless shadows fueled by the ruthless will of the Pittsburgh Circle. Every step was a fight for survival, as gunshots echoed off brick walls, and their breath came in ragged gasps. Luck and local allies had kept them alive so far, but the danger pressed close like a living thing. They darted through forgotten courtyards and slipped into the dim light of hidden taverns, where sympathetic workers whispered warnings. These men and women had their own reasons to defy the industrial giants who crushed dissent and bought silence with blood money. For a brief moment, Edmund felt the weight of his sister's sacrifice spur him onward. The portfolio in his hands was more than evidence. It was a promise to Evangelene that the truth would not die with her. But every corner held the threat of betrayal and the chilling certainty that the Pittsburgh Circle's reach extended even here. Their network of spies and killers was vast and merciless. As dawn approached, Edmund and Flanagan vanished into the city's shadows. But neither could shake the grim knowledge that this was only the beginning. Marked and hunted, they had become fugitives in a war that stretched beyond any battlefield they had known, Their escape was a desperate gambit. But the fight for justice was far from over, because in the darkest corners of America's industrial rise, truth was the most dangerous weapon of all. After narrowly escaping death, Edmund vanished into the sprawling expanse of Los Angeles under a new name, Edward Harrison. The weight of his sister's final message haunted him as he lived in constant fear, knowing the Pittsburgh Circle would never stop hunting him. His life became a shadowed existence, balancing secrecy with a relentless determination to expose the criminal empire his family had uncovered. Years passed, and the conspiracy's grip tightened. But Edmund gathered fragments of truth piece by piece, working with federal agents and a small circle of trusted allies. The documents Evangeline had hidden slowly surfaced in the hands of investigators who dared to challenge the industrial titans. Federal agents led by Attorney General Harry Doege pushed forward with a sprawling investigation into the shadowy network. Their discoveries shocked the nation, revealing decades of murder, corruption, and manipulation at the highest levels of industry and government. The Pittsburgh Circle's reach spanned far beyond Pennsylvania, touching railroads, banks, and political offices in a web of greed and blood. Edmund's courage and sacrifice became the linchpin of a slow-burning crusade for justice. But the price had been devastating. The legacy of fear and death had scarred a generation. Still, hope remained that through this painful reckoning, the darkest corners of American industry could be brought into the light. In 1921, during renovations of the old Vandermark mansion, workers uncovered a secret chamber hidden behind the library's oak paneling. Inside lay Evangeline's meticulously preserved archive of evidence, along with her skeletal remains, dressed in fragments of the emerald gown. The chamber revealed a chilling truth: she had been walled up alive, trapped with the proof that would expose the Pittsburgh Circle's crimes. Scratches on the walls told a desperate story of her final hours, clawing for freedom in the darkness of her hidden tomb. The discovery ignited a federal investigation that pierced the veil of corruption, reaching the highest levels of government. Scores of powerful industrialists, politicians, and law enforcement officials were implicated in systematic murder, fraud, and espionage. The scandal rocked America, forcing reforms in labor protections, industrial safety, and the oversight of corporate crime. Evangeline's sacrifice became a beacon inspiring reformers, journalists, and workers to continue fighting injustice throughout the 20th century. Though the Vandermark mansion was demolished, the legacy of courage and truth endured as a warning of the cost of unchecked power. Her story reminds us that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, individual acts of bravery can alter the course of history. What secrets still lurk in the shadows of industry, and who will stand to reveal them next? The fight for justice is never truly over,